Welcome to a tutorial on how to make mugs like these. This one that I have, and this is my favorite mug so far. Let me introduce to you guys on how I made it. So ceramic is an art form that requires a lot of patience and attention to detail, and sometimes it could take up to weeks to produce a single piece, with the waiting time for the pots to dry and to fire twice in total. In this tutorial, we will cover the process of making a ceramic mug from start to finish using the A104 Artfart B mixed clay, which turns into an off-white color with speckles after firing. This type of clay is suitable for rich colors like these, and it is like a canvas, so I draw a lot of my art on top of it. So for the first step, we'll start with wedging. So wedging is necessary for every piece of ceramic. For this particular cup, we use about 900 grams of clay to fill the cup, but the end product ended up just being about 360 grams. Before we start, it is important to wedge up the clay. This is the process where we fold and mix up the drier parts of the outside of the clay with the softer parts inside. Through this process, we also remove air pockets through repeatedly compressing the clay. After that, we'll start to throw the mud on the wheel. To center the clay, we will cone up and cone down 3 times. While coning up, we make sure the top is pointed like a cone and doesn't have a divot like this. When coning down, lean the clay forward so the mass moves downwards and not remain on the top. And for the last cone down, push your entire body weight onto the clay and make sure every bit of the clay is centered. After that, you should be able to feel that everything spins around in a circle, and if it doesn't, it will show up as wobbly walls as you pull up the clay, and it will be hard to correct it after this step. So these steps are crucial to ensuring your clay is properly centered and ready for the next steps in making your ceramic mug. The pot is then formed by pushing down the middle of the clay with a finger covered by a sponge to avoid scratching the clay. The goal is to create a pot with a base thickness of 2 cm to trim a 12-foot ring and have a rounded base internally. You should be careful not to press down all the way to the wheel head and to check the thickness of the pot constantly, as it could be difficult to fix and may cause cracking later on. To check, we poke a needle down the middle of the pot as it reaches the wheel head. As we hold the needle and the needle touches down to the wheel head, we can check the thickness with my finger when I pull my finger back out. And if there's a hole on the pot, we can just compress the needle hole back with a sponge. Finally, the pot is colored back into a more trapezium shape so that the top is smaller than the base and pointing upwards. This will help us pull up and prevent the cup from being flaring out into a bowl. When pulling up, make sure everything is constantly wetted and running smooth. A catch could result in wobbly walls as you pull up the clay, and it will be very hard to correct. I hold a sponge outside the pot to gradually release water to constantly rehydrate the pot. You can stop midway through a pull and remove your hands gently and rehydrate the pot before pulling again. Once you pull up all the way to the top, release the tension in your hands slowly while staying in position and gently lift your hands up without disturbing the pot. Then start from the bottom again until you reach the height and width you want. After throwing the mug, you'll need to remove the slip from the surface of the clay using a metal kidney. This is also the time to reshape the pot into the shape you want. If the walls are not evenly thrown, I will focus on reshaping the internal walls of the pot instead of the external walls, because if the walls are not evenly thrown, the thicker pots will bulge out during the stage, and you can easily trim these away in the trimming stage, so rest easy if the outside looks a little wonky, as long as the internal side is the shape you want. And then I will use a wooden knife held at 45 degrees and cut into where the base starts. For example, for me, it will be 2 cm tall until you hit the wheel head. And remove the knife from where you cut into it and do not drag it around. And it may look like you're trimming a lot away, but trimming it now means less work for you later on. Then hold the needle to the wheel and slowly slide it into the pot until it reaches where the wooden knife cut, and then you can easily pull the entire strip of clay away. To finish up, use a leather tool to round the rim so the cup is easier to use, and cut away the pot using a wire and move it to a wooden board. Then onto a drying rack to dry overnight. Make sure there aren't any drafts of air, or the piece may dry unevenly and slope to one side. After waiting for the mug to dry overnight, check when you press it if the rim is squashed by your hands. If it's not, then it's leather hard and ready to be trimmed. So I center the clay on the piece by positioning it in the middle as best as you can using the guidelines on the wheel head. Hold your finger in one place, and as it spins, see if the piece bumps into your hands periodically. Stop the wheel whenever it touches your finger and push inward where it touches you. Repeat a few times until the piece spins truly in the middle and feels smooth on your hands. And then stick 3 fresh lumps of clay on the side of the pot, forming a triangle, and push downwards instead of inwards so you don't bend the piece in the process. And these clay bits are here to gently hold the piece in place as it spins. Then I will draw 2 guidelines for this particular shape of cup. One is the 6 cm wide one for the exterior width of your foot ring, which you would want to be consistent on all of your cups, and trim everything outside of the boundary away. Then the next guideline is 2.5 cm wide, which is for the area of the lowest point you can trim, which is 1.5 cm deep for me. So I try to basically trim a cylinder that's 2.5 in diameter and 1.5 in height. Next, I'll use a trimmer to connect the foot rings and the base of the cup in a rounded manner. Then I'll use a small trimmer to trim into the delicate parts of the foot ring. I then use a wetted sponge to remove any breakage scratches from trimming knives and to soften the foot ring, so when you put it on the table, it does not chip easily. Then a metal kidney to smoothen the sponge marks. After that, we'll add the handle. First of all, spread some water all around the cup and make sure it doesn't pull up anywhere to prepare for attaching handles. Wedge up a piece of clay and shape it into a droplet shape and pull the clay downwards into an even tube of clay. This can be done by alternating the place you position your hands and pulling downwards with a wetted hand. If there are any slip that forms on your hand, be sure to scrape it away before the next pull. The length you aim for depends on the shape you want for your cup, but it's always better to pull a little extra so you can cut away more instead of not having enough. So I pull my cups to approximately 10 cm. I will position the handles in a curve and place it onto a wooden board. This allows the handles to be curved without forming cracks like it would if the handles just roll out on the table and not pull. Allow the handles to dry until it doesn't bend easily when you move it around, and put it on the cup and adjust to the shape you want. Then I'll cut away the excess, matching with the slope of my wall, and roll out the excess clay into long clay bits, like worms. And I'll spray the cup with water again, then scratch up the surface, and then also scratch up the clay bit to wrap around the joint, and press it down and smooth everything together. I finish up with a wetted sponge and my finger until it's completely smooth. After everything's done, I'll let the piece dry over a week, and I'll wrap the drying area with plastic to create a more constant atmosphere to help the handle bind to the cup with minimal cracks. After the cup dries, it will be ready to fire, depending on the environment in which it is placed. A hotter and drier climate will result in faster drying time, whereas a colder and more humid climate will result in a slower drying time. But if the piece is dried too suddenly, like using a heat gun or a fan pointing directly at it, there's a high chance of cracking due to uneven and sudden change in moisture. It's on to bisque firing. It's important to check if a piece is bone dry before firing, as firing a piece that still has water inside it could cause it to explode in the kiln. To check if a piece is bone dry, hold your skin against it. If it feels cold, there might still be water inside. A bone dry piece is lighter in color, very light in weight, and very easy to crack, and not cool to touch. So to be safe, you can turn on the preheat setting on your kiln so that the piece will dry thoroughly and gently before firing. When firing the kiln, make sure no flammable objects such as cloths or wood are near the kiln. Since I use a Scott KM714, which can be used in a non-industrial grade electricity setting, so we have it in our studio where we work daily. And it's very important to ensure the environment is safe and we have proper ventilation so that we don't inhale any of the fumes that might be produced during the fire. It's recommended to fire when no one is in the studio and to turn up the ventilation and to open a window a day after firing for additional ventilation. During this firing, the pieces can touch each other, so I packed the kiln to the absolute fullest, stacking pieces on top of each other, and I fired the kiln to cone 5. After the bisque firing, the pieces are now less fragile and have shrunk in size and have become absorbent. However, it is still not recommended to hold the pieces only by their handles. To prepare for glazing, I will clean them and wash off all the dust in water and let them dry out completely. Then I'll wax the bottoms. I will center the pieces on a clean wheel and use the foot ring to center and not the cup so that I could avoid the handle bumping into my hand. While the wheel is spinning, I brush on the wax so that it lines up perfectly circular. I usually do this 0.5 cm above the base of the cup. Waxing the cups will make it easier to clean up spray paint and when I dip the cups in clear glaze from the bottom. If the base is covered with clear glaze, when it fires, the glaze will melt in the kiln and fuse the cup with the kiln shelf and ruining the piece and my shelf. Then finally we can start to glaze the piece. It's my favorite part! First I sketch out the general idea I want for the cup with a pencil. The pencil will burn away in the kiln, so feel free to draw more on. Then I'll cut out sticker pieces. These are faulty ones because there are some folds on it, so I just use them for my ceramic instead. And I'll stick the stickers onto the piece and start to spray paint. Refill the bottles of underglaze that I dilute with a little bit of water so the paint is easier to come out. But at the same time, I will have to spray on more layers this way. I spray paint with a face mask that can block particulates in the air, and I do it in a well-ventilated area with no animals nearby. I spray paint 3 to 5 layers. Between each layer, I wait for the last layer to be completely dry before spraying on. After everything is dried up, I will clean up the spray paint with a towel and remove the sticker and clean up the edges using water and a paintbrush. Following this, I'll draw in sketches using my underglaze pencils, both on the bare ceramic and on top of the glaze. To protect the clay and make it stronger, I will cover the piece with clear glaze. And after the glaze fires, it will form a glass layer outside the piece, protecting the piece from water damage, and it will be much sturdier. I've diluted the glaze to make it easier to get into the crevices of the cup like these ones. So I will mix the clay up with some clay before I dip. I dip the outside first to avoid interrupting the pattern I drew on, and I do this for 20 seconds. And after the glaze is completely dried outside, I can safely touch it and glaze the inside. And remember to clean up all the glaze that remained on the wax, and so that it doesn't stick to the board when it fires. And for the final step, it'll be glaze firing. For this firing, I will fire to cone 5, and I will position the pieces 1 centimeter apart and use a clay disc pre-fired and painted with kiln wash to prevent the pieces from sticking to the shelf in case the glaze drips when it melts. And here are the final products. Like and subscribe for more videos and more types of tutorials if you want. Comment below on what type of tutorial you would like to see in depth next. Feel free to check out these cups on our website. Bye bye.